That night, Shen Qingqiu's dreams were both torturous and unending. When the dawn of the second day came, the first to open his eyes was Luo Binghe. Some colour had returned to his snow-pale face, and his complexion was much improved over how it had been the previous night. On the contrary, the one who'd been bursting with energy the evening prior before they retired, who'd held Luo Binghe all the way until they woke, was now dazed, drowsy, and seemed a bit fatigued. Shen Qingqiu had in fact passed an entire night's worth of spiritual energy into Luo Binghe, not stopping even after he dozed off. Luo Binghe slowly fluttered his eyelashes. For a while he gazed at Shen Qingqiu with a complicated expression, then reached out to move Shen Qingqiu's arms. The moment Shen Qingqiu was moved, he startled up, jolted even further awake. Luo Binghe took his chance to sit up and leave the bed. Shen Qingqiu was profoundly bewildered. Usually it was impossible to dislodge Luo Binghe even when he kicked, yet this morning Luo Binghe had voluntarily detached himself. He pinched the bridge of his nose and wrinkled his brow. "What are you doing up so early? Making breakfast? You don't have to today," Shen Qingqiu said. Then he saw that Luo Binghe was wearing only a thin inner robe, the collar left undone. His vast crisscrossing wounds had already closed, leaving nothing more than faint marks. They would probably be done healing by the end of the day. However, this left almost half his chest wholly exposed to the elements. The outer robe from the night prior could no longer be worn, so Shen Qingqiu reminded him. "Your old clothes are still in the side room. Yingying and the others haven't touched them." Luo Binghe slipped around and behind the screen, heading to the side room. A spotless little world of its own met his eyes. There was a furniture set constructed from green bamboo, complete with a table, chair, bed, and cabinet. At the head of the bed, there was even a small stand upon which lay neatly shelved scrolls and manner of brushes, the latter arranged according to length. Upon opening the cabinet doors, he found folded white robes all stowed away in a tidy fashion. Above them there even hung high-quality jade accessories in various styles. In the time Luo Binghe was in the side room, Shen Qingqiu slowly rose from the bed. He scanned for where he'd left his shoes while rubbing his temples. What a terrible fucking sleep he'd had. He was about to lose it. He'd been dream after dream, dream after dream after dream after dream. Even his shameful dark memory of fighting the Skinner-Dimming in Shuanhu City had been dredged up, and even dreams within dreams. The Immortal Alliance Conference, Jinglan City, Huaye City, the Holy Mausoleum. He'd gone through everything like a merry-go-round, including the times he'd been beaten, the times he'd coughed up blood, the times his body had sprouted all over with foliage. Having had so many dreams crammed into his head in one night, it was about to explode. It was abso-fucking-lutely because he'd passed all that spiritual energy into Luo Binghe while sleeping. Whenever Luo Binghe's psyche was unstable, anyone who slept near him would suffer. At that moment, Luo Binghe finished dressing and emerged from the side room with a turn. Shen Qingqiu had yet to find his shoes, but he stopped looking. Instead, he waved at Luo Binghe to beckon him over to the bed, then pulled him down. However, Luo Binghe failed to be pulled. He raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" Shen Qingqiu felt around beneath the pillow and pulled out a hair tie alongside a wooden brush. "What do you think?" Only then did Luo Binghe obediently sit down in front of him while glancing all around the bamboo house. As Shen Qingqiu brushed his hair, he asked on a whim, "What are you looking at?" Luo Binghe's gaze remained sharp and cold, but his voice warmed and softened. "These past few years, every time I returned to Qingjing Peak, it was in a rush. I never could give it a proper look. Shen Qingqiu held the hair tie between his teeth and impishly braided him a tiny plait in secret. Then, these days, you can look your fill. I'll pay Baizhan Peak a visit later and get Liu Jingge to properly discipline the lot of them. There's absolutely no rationale to justify Qingjing Peak disciples being chased around by Baizhan Peaks. Luo Binghe stilled for a while. Then he slowly turned his head and smiled at him before saying sweetly, "Shicun." Shicun. It was as if this was Luo Binghe's very first time using such a novel term of address. He repeated it again and again without pause. Every time he did, he received an answer, and he grew increasingly addicted to it until Shen Qingqiu couldn't take it anymore. He picked up his fan and swatted the back of Luo Binghe's head. "Enough with the Shizun. Once is sufficient. Say what you mean properly." Now that he'd been struck on the back of his head, Luo Binghe's expression darkened, but he swiftly rectified it and smiled ambiguously. His gaze swept to the side. "Did Shizun sleep well last night?" "Could I sleep well while holding you?" Shen Qingqiu thought. But he said mildly, "I dreamed of a number of old affairs, that's all." "Then next time, should I hold Shizun while we sleep instead?" Of course, he could say such words so casually. Having accomplished his task, Shen Qingqiu patted his head and pushed him off the bed. Go. Then Shen Qingqiu did as he'd promised and paid Baizhan Peak a visit. Heading over there was familiar and easy. He didn't even need to deliver a visitor's notice. After swallowing 2 mouthfuls of the light congee Mingfan sent him, he adjusted his clothes and sauntered off. He left Luo Binghe behind in the bamboo house, admonishing him to, quote, "Be good and wait until this master comes back," unquote. But as if Luo Binghe would be willing to just be good and wait. Luo Binghe had just opened the door when he saw a delicate orange-colored figure bound toward him. He took a good look, then said, full of smiles, "Ying Ying." Unexpectedly, Ning Ying shuddered and paled in shock. "What's wrong with you, Luo? Did you hit your head? Why did you address me like that? What the hell is wrong with this Ying Ying? That's terrifying." Luo Binghe fell silent. Ning Ying's expression of pure horror had yet to fade. "Why didn't you call me Ning Marshal's sister?" A pause. Ning Marshal's sister. That quote, Marshal's sister, was uttered with a fair amount of internally gnashed teeth. Ning Marshal's sister sighed in relief and patted her chest as she chided him. "Now that's better. Changing terms of address like that out of the blue, it didn't sound like you at all. Shizun may dote on you, but you must always respect seniority. That way, we dishonor neither our status as Qingjing Peak disciples nor Shizun's teachings." Upon hearing this, veins bulged in Luo Binghe's forehead as he lost his patience. "I have something to ask you." Understanding shortly dawned on Ning Ying's face. With a wave, she solemnly placed a whisk and broom in Luo Binghe's hand. "Ning Marshal's sister understands. Here." Silence. "Don't take offense, Luo," Ning Ying said sincerely. "You invariably want to clean Shizun's bamboo house by yourself. I know that. But the 2 of you were gone for a long time, so Big Marshal Brother and I could only get started on it ourselves. However, since you've returned, I'll leave it to you. Martial sister won't compete with you for chores. When it comes to this, Martial sister still understands. Like fuck you do. Luo Binghe turned and left for Xuansu Peak. Xuansu Peak's disciples had always welcomed him very warmly. No matter where he went, it was the same. In the past, Shen Qingqiu had given Luo Binghe quite a few miscellaneous errands. Thus, one could often have found him on Xuansu Peak. From time to time, he'd gone there to deliver a letter, distribute a notice, invite someone over, or borrow something. When male disciples from other peaks came, they would at least sneak a couple of peeps, peering around and around until they ended up looking inside the maiden's quarters or bathhouse. Naturally, they would be beeped to death by the maiden's swords long before they made it to the bathhouse. Only Luo Binghe had treated the peak's disciples with respect and consciously maintained a strict distance every time he came. His reputation at Xuansu Peak was correspondingly high. Therefore, everyone on Xuansu Peak had given him tacit permission to enter the inner halls to wait. With her face veiled, Liu Mingyan politely bowed in greeting. Luo Martial Brother. Luo Binghe had yet to speak when she nodded at him and continued. Did Luo Martial Brother come to invite Shizun on Shen Martial Uncle's orders? Please wait here for a while. I will first make arrangements for my Taoist friends from Tianyi Temple. Then I will return. The 3 Taoist friends she spoke of were those 3 beautiful nuns. Their lovely, delicate figures were enveloped in aquamarine Taoist robes as they orbited her. 6 liquid eyes stared at Luo Binghe as they spent a moment whispering into each other's ears, then spent another moment stamping their feet coquettishly, their cheeks flushed red. They were like 3 radiant blue blooms circled around a slender lotus, playful and giggling, before they all headed out as a group. As promised, Luo Binghe waited patiently for Liu Mingyan to return. After standing there for only a short while, he realized that the corner of a small book was peeking out from amidst the mess of scrolls upon her desk. It was obvious that it had been shoved beneath them in a hurry. So, Liu Mingyan also had things she wanted to hide. He casually pulled out the booklet she'd hidden and gave it a rough glance over. Finding the cover gaudy, with each of the titles 3 words written in a more ridiculous cursive than the last, he wrinkled his brow. He smiled at the signature, quote, Sleeping Willow Flower, unquote, and flipped it open, and was struck silent. When Shen Qingqiu returned from Baizhan Peak after drinking tea and having a heart-to-heart, Luo Binghe was waiting for him within the bamboo house. The moment he entered, he felt a gaze shoot over him, boiling and burning. Shen Qingqiu made an internal face. Well, now I'm a bit afraid to close the door. What's going on? Atop the bed, Luo Binghe reclined on his side and smiled. What's wrong? Why won't Shizun come here? While it was said in that same soft tone, touched by a little bit of hurt, his eyes told a different story. He was looking Shen Qingqiu up and down as if he'd never seen him before. It was like he was trying to scrape off a layer of Shen Qingqiu's skin with his eyes. Shen Qingqiu's appearance was stellar. His shoulders were neither too broad nor too bulky, while his waist was thin and his legs long. Enveloped in Qingjing Peak's many-layered teal uniform, he was immaculate and slender, with a great deal of graceful beauty. Yes, it was his graceful beauty. Shen Qingqiu pushed the door shut behind him. He had yet to get within 5 steps of Luo Binghe when he was yanked forward and he fell into Luo Binghe's embrace as those arms tightened around his waist. Luo Binghe's fingers trailed down his side, occasionally squeezing and kneading. Hand, thank you, your hand. When Shen Qingjiu went to grab Luo Binghe's paw in a backhanded grip, he twisted. Somehow Shen Qingjiu found himself pressed down on top of Luo Binghe's thigh with his legs apart, trapped in place. In the next moment, Luo Binghe caressed the nape before pulling him down, and his lips were captured again. He dared not move. Fuck, in this position he really didn't dare move. Though they engaged in activities far surpassing this a while back, the previous time had been a special situation. Plus, there had been an impending disaster, so there had been no time to worry about shyness or reservations. And while they'd been fairly intimate during their near half-month in the demon realm, for some reason, whether out of bashfulness or something else, Luo Binghe had never done anything too forward. Yet, at this time and at this location, the situation was completely different. The sun hadn't even set yet. Was sex in broad daylight really okay? Had he sheltered this child so much it broken him? Shen Qingqiu was highly unaccustomed to being so close to someone while wide awake, but Luo Binghe was a porcelain doll who shattered at the slightest touch, and he would never survive another careless drop. So, Shen Qingqiu reciprocated Luo Binghe's actions and opened his mouth a little. Speaking of, something was strange. Shen Qingqiu had been in this body for ages now, and it had always felt like so, cold and unfeeling from head to toe, no matter where he was touched. Nothing tickled him regardless of where he was poked, and he seemed to have no sensitive spots. But as Luo Binghe kneaded him, the pressure gentle yet varied, he felt a nigh unbearable prickling itch. Why is he so proficient? Why? Even though he's a virgin, why? An instant expert after only one time. Why? How is this fair? I'm going to sue. I'm going to yell. Why? Luo Binghe nibbled on Shen Qingqiu's lip while his tongue probed and prodded within Shen Qingqiu's mouth. Having difficulties keeping up with the pace, Shen Qingqiu began to pant faintly. However, whenever he moved his head away even a little, Luo Binghe pulled him back and kissed him even more deeply. Unable to catch his breath, his eyes squeezed shut in a frown, Shen Qingqiu was naturally unable to see the malice flashing within Luo Binghe's gaze. As his perch on Luo Binghe's thigh was unsteady, he involuntarily reached out and grabbed at Luo Binghe's collar, but he missed the cloth, instead landing on the skin of Luo Binghe's chest, the smooth, unblemished skin of his chest. In that moment, Shen Qingqiu's mind went as blank and white as snow. Then his palm suddenly exerted great force, and he fired a spiritual blast at, quote, Luo Binghe's heart. Quote, Luo Binghe took this powerful surge of spiritual energy head on, but he remained utterly unaffected. With a cold laugh, he encircled Shen Qingqiu's right wrist with one hand while continuing to press down on his nape with the other. Then he skillfully flipped them over, rolling them onto the bed together. Looking down at Shen Qingqiu from overhead, he smiled brightly. "What's wrong, Shizun? Don't you love me very much? So why aren't you willing to give in to me?" "Go fuck yourself," Shen Qingqiu thought. "Beat it," spat Shen Qingqiu. Quote, Luo Binghe's lips and teeth went from gentle worrying to vicious biting, instantly filling Shen Qingqiu's mouth with the taste of blood. Shen Qingqiu formed a seal with his left hand, summoning Xiuya sword from where it lay on the table. When, quote, Luo Binghe's movement slightly slowed, Shen Qingqiu took the chance to kick upward and plant his foot against the imposter's chest. But he hadn't managed to get all the way up when something clamped down on his ankle. He looked back to see, quote, 骆宾和's hand grasped there, at which point it abruptly yanked, dragging Shen Qingqiu back beneath him a second time. Right after, he forced Shen Qingqiu to straighten, then with a hand still clasped around Shen Qingqiu's calf, folding Shen Qingqiu's leg against his chest with a downward press. He accomplished this entire set of movements in a single breath. "Where is he?" yelled Shen Qingqiu. Quote, 骆宾和 cocked his head. "Who are you asking about? If it's me, aren't I right here?" Now able to catch his breath, Shen Qingqiu asked, "How did you end up here?" Quote, 骆宾和 toyed with his hair. "For my part, I'm more curious as to how Shizun found me out." Motherfuck! There were sword scars on both 骆宾和's palm and chest, once given to him by Shen Qingqiu himself. "Do you really want to find out?" asked Shen Qingqiu. Quote, 骆宾和 lowered his body further and said, his voice chilly yet colored by a hint of provocation, "It's fine if you don't want to say. We have plenty of time, enough for me to find out." "Then why not take a look behind you?" The curve on, quote, 骆宾和's lips froze. Startled, he abruptly swiveled his head back, guard raised. A face, exactly like his, partly illuminated and partly in shadow, rushed forward. That face was like snow, like frost, frigid down to the core, yet its eyes burned like ghost fire, the color a searing, bloody crimson. Within the bamboo house were two identical people with the same exact face, other than one being dressed in white, the other in black. There was not a single discernible difference between them. At the black-robed 骆宾和's waist hung a sword sealed tightly within layers upon layers of paper talismans. To think that the once kingly Xingmo sword, overflowing with power and tyrannical energy, would end up bound in such a rough and unseemly manner, unable to release a single wisp of demonic energy. 骆宾和's voice came in a hoarse but forceful whisper. "Unhand him." A spiritual blast accompanied this quiet, enraged snarl. The white-robed, quote, 骆宾和 locked firmly between Shen Qingqiu's legs, promptly and decisively returned it. The two attacks met in midair with a harsh sound, scattering dust and smoke throughout the room. Quote, 骆宾和 wore an expression of incredible disappointment. "You couldn't have returned a little earlier or a little later?" he asked contemptuously. "You just had to choose a time like this." He had yet to finish speaking when Shen Qingqiu curled his pointer and middle fingers. Xiuya's sword's hilt trembled slightly where the sword had stabbed into the wall, then flew into his hand. His grip clenched into a fist, and he immediately swung his arm, chopping downward. Sandwiched between two attacks, quote, 骆宾和 finally couldn't maintain the provocative posture any longer. He flipped off the bed, not forgetting to give Shen Qingqiu's waist another squeeze before leaving, then gracefully landed at the other end of the bamboo house. "Shizun is so merciless with his attacks," he said, adopting a sad expression. "Doesn't his heart hurt for his disciple even a little?" "Get the fuck out! Who's your Shizun?" This guy was a male lead of the Zhongdian stallion novel Proud Immortal Demon Wei, the original flavor 骆宾和. Previously, the system's punishment protocol had set him loose. This godly man who was admired by Zhongdian readers everywhere. On those forums, anyone who brought him up reverently uttered the same name. Bingge. Shen Qingqiu could never have anticipated that this guy would show up not only within the punishment protocol, but within the standard world as a real solid entity. All this given, it seemed like the system's so-called punishment hadn't just been setting a character simulation loose. It had directly pulled Bingge over from a parallel universe, one that belonged to the original novel. Ever since the day before, Shen Qingqiu had nursed the vague feeling that something was off, but maiden-law had always been the type to kick up a fuss or act spoiled at the drop of a hat. Plus, because he'd been anxious and concerned, Shen Qingqiu had only paid attention to treat his injuries and failed to give Luo Binghe's behavior careful thought. On the real Luo Binghe's palm and chest were sword scars that had been left by Shen Qingqiu himself. That child treasured even that kind of thing, and he refused to heal them, instead preserving them on his body. How, therefore, could Shen Qingqiu ever get to touch, quote, smooth and blemished skin? In the end, he and Luo Binghe were too unfamiliar with each other's bodies. That was why it had taken him so long to figure out what was wrong here. 1,000 fortunes that he'd reined it in right at the edge of a cliff. So close, he'd almost lost all integrity. There. At this point, that quote, leave, Luo Binghe had directed at him the day before on their first encounter within the underground palace became much easier to understand. The word hadn't meant, quote, hurry up and run, I don't want to drag you down, unquote, but rather, get the fuck away from me, you scumbag piece of shit. The sword-carrying, black-robed Luo Binghe threw himself forward and said in a rush, Shicun, did that bastard do anything to you? Isn't calling him a bastard basically calling yourself one? It was only a roast for the sake of roasting. Shen Qingqiu looked at Luo Binghe's face, at its brimming urgency as he clung to him, unwilling to let go, and felt deeply relieved. Now this was how Luo Binghe should be.